So we are live. Hello and welcome everybody to this first edition of SEO Bytes with Nitin in 2021, a special year. So I'm so looking forward to the whole year 2021. 2020 was not that great for all of us, but let's make 2021 a very special year. And for that, we have two amazing experts. Well, they are my two favorites. I'm absolutely like super honest and transparent about it. They are my two favorite SEOs, and I'm so happy that I got to convince them to join me here. Super happy, and they will be sharing some great tips to help us win SEO in 2021. So I cannot wait for it. I know you can't wait for it either. And first of all, I mean, we generally start with introductions, but I don't think these two people really need any introduction. But still, there are some people who are new in the industry and they're starting, with their first webinar probably. So let's start with a quick introduction. And I don't want to, talk about them. I want them to introduce themselves, because if I speak about them, I would need an hour, and we only have an hour for covering a lot of topics. So let's start with Jason.
Right, you're such a charmer, Nitin. That's delightful. Thank you very much. I'm charmed and I'm blushing. I'm Jason Barnard. I'm the brand SERP guy. Brand SERPs are what your audience sees when they Google your brand name. I think it's deeply underestimated within the industry and by brands in general. It's incredibly important, not just for people searching your brand name, but also to give you a better understanding of how Google perceives your brand or yourself as a person. So this is what I always talk about obsessively and overexcitedly. So if you want to talk about that with me, connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or visit caddycube.pro to learn more about me. And the other thing is, Nitin, I remember you said I was the knowledge graph guy. I love the knowledge graph. Google's knowledge graph is one of my favorite things, alongside brand SERPs. That's me, professionally speaking.
Lovely. Well, Jason, I think you should not say that, people can find you on Twitter or LinkedIn, other mediums. They can just Google, and you are like the strongest brand person, right? I mean, you are Brilliant. There completely. So why not?
Yes. Search my name, you will probably find me.
Yeah. Along with some nice cartoons, right?
Yeah, well, I've been working on my own brand SERP. What appears when you search for Jason Barnard for 7 years, and it's been a very, very, very interesting journey. And if you look at it, I mean, it's all controlled by me. There are 250 Jason Barnards in the world. None of them get a look in, unfortunately for them, and I do apologize. But Google is so confident in me and what it knows about me that it shows things like Search Engine Journal, Semrush, myself, my own site, my company site, knowledge panel on the right I used to be a blue dog in a cartoon. I used to be in a folk punk group. Both of those are on there. My daughter's on there. And unfortunately, it actually says related entities, other people that Google associates me with, and it's got Bill Slawski, Joost de Valk, Rand Fishkin, Cindy Crum, and I'm missing Aleyda Solis, but that's my next target.
Amazing. Well, so good. And you'll be talking about that today, right?
Yeah, partially. I'm talking about rich elements because one of the interesting things about brand SERPs is that they're full of rich elements, and it's an incredibly insightful way to understand how Google actually triggers them. I'm going to explain how the rich elements, the SERP features, get triggered by the Google algorithm. And also helps you to see how your content strategy is evolving, how well you're doing, because Google shows on your brand SERP. That's what appears when somebody searches your exact match brand name. It shows what's most relevant and valuable for your audience. And remember, your audience is a subset of Google's users. And it will show what's relevant and valuable. And if it's showing video boxes, it thinks that those videos, the videos you have made or about you, are valuable and relevant to your audience. That means you're doing a good job. If you're working on videos and they don't appear, it means you're doing a bad job. Either the videos are not as relevant as you thought they were for your audience, or Google simply hasn't understood, which means you're not communicating the fact that they are valuable and relevant to your audience, which is, just something you need to do. You need to make sure that Google understands that these videos are important. Absolutely, so it's an incredibly interesting insight into how these rich elements work and how Google perceives these rich elements within the context of the brand. But then from that, moving out to the entire ecosystem around your brand, including the more general SEO results that Aleyda is going to talk about.
Cool.
And I'm talking for the Olympics.
And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Then thank you so much. So looking forward to that. And thanks, Jason, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. And now moving to the next expert, that's Aleyda Solis. Well, I should say the Aleyda Solis because she is the one and she is the master. Well, I'm a big fan of you, Aleyda. I mean, all the content that you're doing through your articles, amazing. I mean, everything is still bookmarked, even though I've read them like a few times. I'm a big fan. And then your videos, Crawling Mondays, and then you recently started with Clubhouse weekly as well. That's very good as well. Thank you so much, Aleyda, for everything that you're doing for the community. I have, well, of course, I mean, I maybe you can introduce yourself first, and then I have a question for you.
No problem. Let's go to the meat because I have lots of content to share today. I really don't want to spend more time on
All right.
chit chatting. I'd rather go to the actual stuff.
Perfect. Let's do that. So stage is all yours then. Go for it.
Perfect. Yes. And sorry about that, but I have so many. I realized just before, right, that I had all this content and all this presentation, and I just have 15 minutes. So I need to manage to do this with enough time for you to not go crazy
Awesome.
when I go through all of the slides, right?
Yeah, let's agree on 20. No stress. Let's
Yes,
focus on
yes.
content.
Let's start with not stress for sure. Let's try. So SEO success in 2020 first, right? How to win SEO. And I know that there's so many trends out there, new things, etc. And on one hand, we know that SEO is continuously evolving and it's becoming only more complex to achieve results, pretty much because there's a shift and sophistication in user search behavior on one hand. And then, of course, on the other hand, we have search algorithm. You have Google, the search engine, especially, right? Like, let's be realistic. This is what we mostly use in the Western world. We have Google search algorithm continuously improving, trying to better fulfill those user needs, and also making improvements all the time in their presentation layer, besides the algorithmic type of improvements for a better search experience. Then, on the other hand, we have a continuous evolution of website tech stack, right? Especially with JavaScript frameworks that don't necessarily facilitate the fundamentals of how search engines work, right? Crawlability and indexability. And there's also a growing competition and barriers to entry, especially in competitive markets, right? So there's a higher SEO maturity across most profitable industries. So yes, it is only getting tougher, right? So I want to share with you a few areas that I do think are core, are fundamental to get right, to maximize in order to facilitate the achievements of our goals this year. On one hand, the SEO plus product alignment for a strategic approach, understanding and fulfilling audience intent, leveraging and maximizing search features, also trying to maximize our experience or establish our presence in these additional verticals and platforms that Google have, for example, Discover. Then growing also brand authority is critical. And I love that Jason is here to talk more about your own brand. And at the end of the day, is your own entity and your presence. And it doesn't only influence in the way that you are seen or perceived when they are searching about you, but in so many different ways it can impact the how Google sees your website, your property, and the assessment that it will give to you versus any other players out there for very competitive queries. And I'm going to show you how. Then also, unfortunately, there are things that we still need to avoid or minimize, at least some challenges out there that still exist today and are all only growing in some cases. So giving a bad user experience, especially this year with the page experience update and the mobile first index, everything switching to mobile too. Still today, we are going to see that many websites are not giving the best experience on mobile, and there's still an existing gap. Then technical barriers toward crawling and indexing. This is particularly important for bigger websites out there. And SEO implementation blockers. At the end of the day, a year and a half ago, when I asked which were the main causes of why SEO processes fail, people pretty much say, "Oh, it's because they don't implement my recommendations," right? So there's here a very important issue regarding that it's not necessarily sometimes about knowledge. We have knowledge, we have identified the problems, but the main challenge is to get the resources and the flexibility to execute them and fix them at the end of the day. So let's maximize on one hand the alignment of our SEO efforts with our product, right? The product triangle that I call for a strategic approach. And the reason of this is because even today, I see that many SEO processes are driven by a checklist of unconnected SEO tactics that don't necessarily take the business context and goals into consideration. And because of that, won't achieve meaningful results. And this is the type of thing that I'm talking about, like establishing a well-aligned SEO strategy, integrating SEO within the website product triangle, taking into consideration the website growth and marketing efforts as a whole to align whatever activities that we set for with our SEO purposes, but also with the overall efforts of the brand. Then on the other hand, how the website makes money, the business model and the goals, to also take those into consideration. So they don't see SEO as an additional issue or task to be done, but something as a channel, something meaningful that they actually need to also take into consideration to achieve their own results, right? And then of course the functionalities, the features, how we can leverage what already exists on the website in order to maximize whatever actions that we want to achieve or we want to implement to achieve our results, right? So avoid implementing disconnected SEO tactics that won't help you to achieve goals. This is critical. Every time like I see like these hundreds of items checklists that you need to implement, it's like, yes, but which one you should implement first, which makes more sense for you to really start implementing right now, because it will have the higher impact in your particular context, right? So we need to be more effective when setting an SEO strategy that is really aligned with the company's business and functionalities and growth goals, and align also our own efforts to gain support across different areas and departments to avoid that feeling of, they don't want to implement my SEO related task. And sometimes it's because of our lack of integration and communication of them. So how SEO affects and is affected by the companies or the growth marketing efforts, the features of functionalities, business and sales. And we need to, this huge checklist that we have out there, we need to prioritize it and take the business and industry and tech context into consideration to what's the ultimate growth goal to achieve with the overall SEO efforts, how SEO success is realistically measured, how each of the SEO activities in place help to achieve the desired goal. And we will very likely see that half of those tasks that we have there to do pretty much won't have a direct effect, at least at the start, or the biggest effect, and there are like pretty much 20% of them that really need to be implemented right now. And how to prioritize these SEO activities to achieve the desired goal faster and cost effectively, right? So it will allow us to set our SEO activities to be prioritized on impact and difficulty to achieve results, right? So which are the required resources, the known restrictions, the scope, and then on the other hand, which are the affected areas. If these align with the affected areas of those categories or products that are much more important for us, the business important, and the current optimization, of course. So it is a lower hanging fruit. So because I am going to be jumping from topic to topic, if you want to deep dive, and if you think that you really want more information about this particular one, you can take a look at these resources. I covered this particular SEO strategy or SEO as a integrating SEO within the product efforts in for example, in this blog post here to the left. Then I also did a Crawling Mondays about SEO strategy, and Kevin Indig has developed this great guide step by step to help you to establish one, right? Then it's about also understanding and connecting with your audience search intent to become the best comprehensive answer for the queries that actually do matter for you. And this is the thing, right? Every time there is this Google Core update, we see this type of effects, right? Websites dropping in rankings. And in many cases, it's because, the information is inaccurate, is your morning of your life, very sensitive type of information. And they are realistically not a high authority on giving financial or health advice. But on other cases, we see that realistically is because you have been trying to really target too broad queries with content that doesn't connect, that is not necessarily aligned with the intent of the user on one hand, with the content format that is not the right one to be consumed at that stage of the customer journey. So it's important that we better understand our users' intent to be able to craft the content and to format the content in a way that will actually connect with and fulfill their needs, right? So we will be able to achieve that we will have a much better understanding of how the audience search through the customer journey and the different type of information that they want to get from us, then to better develop and structure and organize this format in our content funnel to connect with them and establish, yes, and offering expertise and trustworthiness to fulfill the audience needs. This is fundamental, right? And we have more and more tools and features that allow us to see which are the intent, if it is informational, if it is transactional, if it is navigational of the query, to prioritize accordingly, and to also identify which are the search features through which we want to maximize our visibility. More about this in a bit. And then what is important is to identify, okay, which the search journey, what is the search journey of our audience, and how I can match that search journey for the queries that actually matter with my content funnel, right? Like if these are informational for awareness, which are the guides on topics, and how I can structure them to really fulfill that need and to make it really useful and comprehensive for them, or which are those consideration type of contents, the category pages, the comparison pages that you can create to connect with those type of queries, and which are those purchase related queries that are much more connected with our product pages that we actually need to create in order to already sell. So we can see that the intent and the type of action of the user is very, very different. And sometimes we end up out there is this big joke of how we try sometimes to feature a lot of content in category pages just for the sake of improved relevance, but at the end of the day, the type of content that we end up adding there is a bunch of history of the city or the history of the product, right? And actually this is content that doesn't help the user at that stage of the customer journey and won't fulfill any need of the user. So it's important that we do this type of analysis in order to understand what is the type of content that makes much more sense for our users to structure at that level, at that step of the customer journey. So for example, in your category pages, it will be information that will be pretty much the same information that a salesperson will be giving you when you're trying to choose between different products from the same category in the shop, right? In the physical shop. So developing a quick Q&A to go through the main characteristic of those type of products, the pros and cons, the criteria to take into consideration, to highlight their particular characteristics that will be much more important for the user at that stage of the journey. This is the type of content that is much more meaningful. And then on the other hand is about the establishing the authority, the expertise and trustworthiness of our content, to make it really comprehensive on one hand, but also to make sure that Google and the user sees that you are the source for this sort of information, that they can trust you with their money, with their data, and they can buy for you, and you should be the answer to give for that query, right? And for that, Google has actually shared with us a list of questions that they take into consideration also when evaluating our content for content quality. And what I have done is to gather all of these questions and put them together in this Google Sheet so you can download it and then start answering if your content actually complies and the answer is positive for all of these questions. And then you compare yourself with the one of your competitors out there and see how you are evaluated versus them, because at the end of the day, nothing is absolute, everything is relative versus your competitors. And then you might end up realizing that a good share of your content realistically needs to be pruned. It's out there, but it's not fulfilling any goal. It's only wasting your crawl budget. It's content that is not driving any traffic, any backlinks, any value. And if so, then it's important that you don't only show a 410 HTTP status there, but you actually follow certain guidelines to make sure that it doesn't backlash, right? That you don't end up hurting your website even much more, right? So here you have a flowchart that I created a couple of years ago regarding what are the best steps to take into consideration to remove the content that you really see that, well, there's no need to keep it on your website, right? And the criteria for that. And then on the other hand, take a look at these resources even more. If you think that this is a weak area that you really need much more information step by step, these are amazing step by step to better understand search intent, to develop topic clusters, to improve your EAT by the wonderful Lily. So you can literally like go through them and start optimizing your content using them right now. Then on the other hand, we have the opportunities that search features and visibility in search results can provide us, and not only search results, but also in other additional platforms that Google is also leveraging, like Discover, for example. And why? Because of this. When I search for how to start a podcast, take a look. Yes, the first result is an organic one, but then the second one, we can see how this is a how-to with structured data, and like literally what takes half of the screen here are videos, right? So if you have the capacity to create videos, this is a win-win. You can publish in YouTube because pretty much all this videos from the carousels, Google pull them from YouTube and create an audience there and start your own channel and community there. And then on the other hand, get the visibility for the SERP. So it's a win-win. So this is a type of approach, right? Is to analyze which are the opportunities or the areas that can provide you additional visibility, right, across all of these queries that we have seen before. And we have seen that many of these content types are of videos, product fees now that before were paid through the Merchant Center, and now Google is also showing them in carousels like this for organic search results. Also web stories that Google is showing more and more. So we see how multi-format content becomes even more important, how Google is not only to create content for this features and that's it, but this is content that you can reuse and repurpose for many other type of platforms and additional visibility like YouTube, Discover, or shopping tabs, for example. And indeed, it's not only maximizing your click-through rate, but it's also expanding reach through additional platforms and better inform Google about the content meaning, also with structured data. And of course, here we have also Jason, who has an additional very, very important expertise in this area if we want to talk about this later on. But I will have here a point of saying, like, even if there is opportunity for you to implement structured data that won't generate right ahead as your feature, it's important that you take into consideration, because you're literally telling Google what your content is about and has many other type of outcomes and consequences that won't be potentially visible right away in a search feature type of impact, but will have all the type of impact within Google itself on providing the best answers to relevant queries for your products, right? So what search features are included in mobile and desktop for your search results for your targeted queries? So Semrush is an amazing tool to assess this for your own domains, for your own properties. It tells you for which you are included, for which not. Also, you can do this with your competitors to see which are them leveraging or not. And then when you do a keyword research, again, we have this search features columns that allow us to identify opportunities. So we can when we create content to target these queries, we also know pretty much how we should structure our content and which are the opportunities out there to maximize the visibility of this content, besides trying to rank it better. And then, of course, it's critical that we also identify opportunities and see, for example, with Google Discover, which are the guidelines with the Merchant Center. What is this feed that I need to create? How should I export it to Google, right? So it's important that we understand the best practices, the guidelines, the editorial and the technical ones too. Sometimes we overlook the editorial ones and we end up implementing thinking that is purely a technical thing. And no, it's important to understand if these align in the first place with our goals and meaning and editorial guidelines, and if we can comply with them. And then, on the other hand, it's also leveraging and trying to identify opportunities even outside Google own properties at the end of the day, additional platforms. But yes, for example, with videos that you can attract and grow your brand and presence and authority in many other different ways, right? And this is content that you can repurpose to maximize your search visibility within Google. So take a look at these resources. You will see here all the overview for search appearing topics that Google has this really great hub of information there. And then the best practices for your products, free listings on Google now. And this is a magnificent guide from Andrea Volpini from WordLive about the ultimate checklist of optimize your content content for Google Discover, which I believe that can only grow even more and more and become more important this year. And finally, the one other thing that you should totally do this year to maximize, right, is to grow and leverage your brand authority to develop your search popularity. We talk a lot, and I know that this is sometimes a non-sexy topic, and there has been a lot of chat in the last few days regarding if link building is equal to online PR. And literally, for me, also not only as an SEO, but as a business owner with remoters here, it doesn't matter. I want to grow my authority. I want to get mentions. I want that when I spend my whole weekend or even more gathering data and pulling together this remote work trends and stats for 2021. This is covered out there. If the link is not followed, I don't care if it is Business Insider, if it is an authoritative type of publication out there. But I want to be endorsed. I wanted to get coverage. And this is something that is very on brand because my website is about remote work. So it's not creating content that is completely disconnected with my actual purpose. I want to establish my website authority so they see that this is a brand that actually knows what they are talking about regarding remote works, and they share their trends, they share their insights. They are to follow. We need to follow them, and we need to endorse them because they are the best in their fields, right? And these are so building links or getting links because of this is a byproduct, right? It's not your main goal. It's a byproduct, and pretty much for a lot of brands, this is realistically the most scalable way to do it, and easier way also, especially when it's a web company that has their own PR efforts, like content marketing efforts, community management efforts, and they get also all the time interacting with influencers. And at the end of the day, this is what you get, right? You publish a piece, you make sure that you follow good SEO best practices. You don't, so you're not updating the URL every year, and you leverage the established backlink popularity that you have built in across the years. And at some point, you end up also ranking in the first results with a nicer feature snippet out there for that top query, right? So it's another way to establish your authority, your brand too. So it's about not only attracting, but it's the byproduct of this is growing your link popularity, branded searches to maximize your visibility for your own search much more easily. If you ask me, please give me all the branded searches, because this means that I'm doing a great work establishing my authority. And direct traffic and conversions, I wish to not necessarily rely on third parties to get traffic, even as an SEO, right? The best traffic is the direct traffic, because it means that I am the authority in that field, and everybody who thinks about this type of products and services are already thinking about me. So key questions to ask here: what is your unique selling proposition? What do you want to be known as a brand? What does your audience like to share and to link to? Where do they do it? Who do they follow? What do they read? And how, where, and with whom should you promote these assets and resources, especially at the beginning, to be covered, because you won't have all of these connections, right? I love how NeoMam a few days ago, they shared this amazing list of resources, of amazing pieces that have been published out there, and it's amazing for inspiration and to see what all of this many websites have done in that not only to fulfill and to connect with their user needs, but also to establish also as a consequence their brand much more within their fields. And take a look at these resources again. I interviewed a few months ago to the wonderful Giselle from NeoMam, and also the Rise at 7 director and CEO. So you can see how they think about this. It's amazing. They are at this definitely another level at this in online PR. And then Ira, they are also fantastic, and they're also an authority in the link building field, and they have done this wonderful state of link building report in which we can go through all of the different type of activities that most of the agencies do, right? And then last but not least, let's minimize these other activities. And in this case, I won't explain as much because I think that we all know why we want to avoid this, right? But let's go through the ones that we cannot accept that happen anymore this year, because the backlash can be real. Giving a bad user web experience. Why? Well, we in the first place, we want our users to trust us, right? And we need to facilitate that by giving a good user experience in the first place and providing a good journey in our website. Also, page experience is becoming a ranking factor. It's not that these elements or signals are not taken into consideration right now. They are, but as independent, in disconnected signals, they are going to become one: mobile friendliness, safe browsing, HTTPS, no intrusive interstitial along core web vitals will become the search signals for page experience, and they are going to start being taken into consideration in May. And then we also have the mobile only index happening in March 2021. And realistically, it should be easier for us now to be able to make sure that we give a better user experience, especially with the core web vitals metrics, much more straightforward to understand and to share, and they are sort of standard, right? However, still today, right, we have issues. Many sites still don't pass them. So I had the opportunity to contribute to the SEO chapter of the Web Almanac last year, and we there were terabytes of websites that were analyzed, more than 7 terabytes, if I remember well, and like 33% of those websites in desktop devices pass the validation, and only 19% of mobile pass. What is going on? There are still important issues, right? So the good thing is, like, it should be straightforward. I have shared in the past these Google Docs, these Google Sheets here, with tons of free tools that we can use to validate our website core web vitals, HTTPS, safe browsing, no intrusiveness, to make sure that we comply. And even I share, and you have here the link of this Twitter thread, when I share step by step of how to do an assessment of your core web vitals and speed by using these free tools. And you can see very straightforward which are the issues, if it's JS or CSS or images are too big or are not compressed. So everything you can see there. So it should be straightforward for you, much more than before, to fix. And hopefully it is you are able to do it before May. Then another thing to minimize is generating unnecessary technical barriers for content to be indexed and ranked. And we know that a lot of websites are over-relying on JavaScript, even to create links that could be easy href tags, and for some reason some JavaScript that is not crawlable is used instead. And not only that, we know that content, I'm going to show you a few examples, completely rely on it, and why it's completely unnecessary sometimes. And realistically, it's true that Google is able now to render JavaScript, but we know that they need additional effort to do it. So especially if you have a big website, you don't want to rely on that. You want to make that your content is reachable and accessible and indexable much more straightforward, right? And as you can see here, there is no trivial difference between the content showing raw versus render HTML across the web. Again, from the Web Almanac data, we can see the difference in raw versus render in desktop 360 versus 402 words, and then 312 and 348. Why? Let's avoid that. And that is not even the words. This is a real case from an audit that I was doing the other day. I love how Cyborg showcase and is able to show you the gap between the response versus render HTML from most of the core areas of a page: the title, the meta description, internal links, external links, canonical tags, meta robots. And believe me, it's not only that you add stuff, or we add stuff, and stuff is created, right, using JavaScript only, but stuff is modified. Canonical tags, the URLs are modified. In this particular case, I remember that the URL was sometimes completely shown within the canonical tag. Some meta robots that were indexable in the raw HTML were turned to non-indexable in the render one. So how do we know what Google takes into consideration? How do we confirm? We want to avoid this additional hassle for sure. So let's make sure that we facilitate this, our life, the crawlability and indexability from a technical SEO perspective. Take a look at these resources. There are wonderful resources out there from Content King on JavaScript, SEO best practices. Then also from Wanli, they are really like amazing on identifying issues here, and they have the ultimate guide to JavaScript SEO. And then Google also published not so long ago their guide to facilitate the crawlability and crawl budget on big websites. And we are going to see why and how it is so important to make sure that we really make the most out of the crawl budget that we have, and avoid wasting our crawl budget on pages and resources that are not necessarily that meaningful and could be completely avoided, right? And finally, SEO implementation blockers and horror stories should literally, let's hope this year, be completely avoided, and we don't see any SEO horror stories, and we can have a good, healthy SEO process in most cases. Because last year, for example, and I do this every year, I ask, oh, which are your SEO horror stories, and in the last few months, and I get dozens of answers. I get dozens of retweets, and a lot of people share again and again and again all these pitfalls during web migrations, during dev environments becoming indexable, after changing in the internal web structure without getting the heads up, how redesigns went to hell literally just because they were not involved right from the start, things like that, right? We need to avoid that. So it's funny because there's this paradox. On one hand, sometimes it's so hard to make SEO recommendations to be implemented. On the other hand, there's so much stuff going on sometimes, especially from a web development perspective, that we don't know about and ends up getting launched. And it causes some horror story, and we end up realizing very too late all the time, right? So to avoid that, we need to set a healthy SEO framework that you can see that I shared this presentation here about SEO horror stories. So how we can not only educate, validate, and be proactive in the monitoring of across all of the different type of areas and configurations within our SEO process. And then on the other hand, it's not only this, and I share here like the questions and the stack and the tools to use, but also leveraging automation within an agile approach to show results faster. Sometimes we get stuck and we see all the errors coming up and nothing getting done well, also because we are not able to have this agile approach on implementing things fast. And I love how a few months ago, I talk about HSEO with Dan Taylor and Hamlet Batista. They have their own tools and that they provide as a service to anybody who wants to use them, to use Cloudflare workers to implement stuff that can be sometimes tricky, like canonical tags, redirects, meta robots in general, and how you can end up showing results much faster like this to gain support, development support, and get things right and implemented in the right way in the long term. So as you can see, it's to be a little bit smart, to identify opportunities, to leverage new technology, but also aligning what we know that is important, the core of SEO, and at a level of sophistication and quality that is very well needed to achieve results in 2021. So thank you very much. And hopefully that with all of this, now it's time to achieve our desired SEO goals in 2021.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Aleyda. That was amazing content and a lot of it. So thank you so much for compiling this for us and sharing these tips with everyone. All right. Jason, do you have anything to add here on what Aleyda just shared?
What could you possibly add to such a complete analysis of everything in SEO in 25 minutes? Absolutely nothing to add. I mean, I'm sure we've got lots of questions, so let's keep moving on. As Aleyda said, faster we get through our stuff, faster we get to the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we have a question.
Sorry, I would like to say that was absolutely brilliant. I don't know if I said it clearly enough.
You did, I guess. Yeah, it was amazing indeed. Yeah. All right. So jumping to the question. So the question, we have like one question right now. So the question is, on a small website, does crawl budget come into consideration for taking pruning actions on legacy pages that are getting almost zero traffic, or should we just leave them as they are? So what's your take on that?
So in this case, it wouldn't be necessarily because of crawl budget. If it is a small website, let's say 100 pages, I don't know, 500. Small can be relative again, right? Or less than 10K pages. Crawl budget is a real issue when you have a big e-commerce website or a marketplace or a very big website with a lot of unstructured content that sometimes you don't control yourself because you have user-generated content too, you have forums, etc., and can go easily out of hands, right? On a small website, code budgets shouldn't be the concern, but I have to say, what should be a concern in this case is that well, you might be sometimes giving a bad user experience and search experience and hurting your website overall quality assessment because of these few pages that it's true, they don't bring any value right now, you don't care about, you overlook, you try to not link, but sometimes some people might end up landing there. Sometimes Google will crawl these pages anyway and see that, yeah, crawl not index, or not enough content to index or value to index. So be careful with that, because you really don't want, not only because of the sake of call budget, but you really don't want to game your credibility, your let's say your quality, the quality of the content that you give to Google and the user at some point. So if it is something straightforward for you to do, and if you're sure that these pages are not bringing any value at this point, like validate if they have any visits, if they have any backlinks, any rankings in the last year or so you can prune accordingly, right? You might redirect, you might want to consolidate, etc. Not necessarily just to no index for 10, right? But after you do this validation, if you're certain that they don't bring any value, like, why to have them there? Like, they only can be growing from time to time. I will take your focus and will add noise in general, right? So I will properly have my web structure clean, especially if it is small. Let's try to do things well, especially when it is easy and under control, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's about practice. So maybe you're talking about 1,000 or 10,000 pages website right now, and 10% of that is legacy, what you're calling here. But maybe, I mean, if you're talking about a website which grows, maybe tomorrow you have 1 million pages, and then 10% is a really high number. And when you go to 10 million, the number is even bigger, right? So it's about practicing. It's about, keeping these standard practices in place so that you have optimization, basic optimization, and user experience part of your DNA. And once you do that, then I think you are always serving good user experience, right? And as Aleyda mentioned about core updates, right? People are like, core update, oh my God, that's a big thing, right? It should not be a big thing, because here we're talking about user experience. We're talking about core web principles. So there, I think if you're following that, you should definitely do that. Sorry, Jason, you were saying something.
Oh yeah, I was actually just going to say that the idea of a small site, I think kind of a lot of these tools, when you use a tool to analyze a site, a lot of SEOs will say, oh, we've got errors or whatever. And on a small site, things like this aren't actually that important, as Aleyda rightly said. And we can exaggerate a problem, prioritize it wrongly, and go for this as the big priority, when in fact there are lots of other, I mean, on a small site, one of the first things you should be looking at is your really important pages full of content, and looking at that content and looking at what Aleyda was saying. Do you address the question? Do you answer the question? Do you solve the problem? And are you expressing yourself with the vocabulary that your audience uses? And that's what you're looking for. So that would be a better priority, in inverted commas, for a smaller website.
Exactly. And I remember I was having chat with Don Anderson and Jono the other day on site speed, and we were talking about, like people with smaller website or any size of website, they're chasing site speed like maths. So they are already, if you talk about performance score, they're already at 90, and they're saying, hey, we need to achieve 100, and we need like 3 months of effort. Completely, like, does that even make sense? I mean, think about it logically. As Aleyda also, touched upon this prioritization part, I'm also writing a content piece around that. You should think about opportunity. You should think about reach. You should think about confidence, impact, and also efforts. If you're not thinking about efforts, you are missing a big chunk. So just, be more pragmatic about how exactly you are tackling these things.
Well, it's all about the pragmatism of opportunity cost. What are you not doing when you're doing this thing? And marginal gains. Am I actually making a decent marginal gain on it? So, I mean, I'm an economist by training. Marginal gains, opportunity cost. You really have to think about that, not just follow the reports that these automatic tools throw at you.
100%. A lot of people lose so much time and effort on checklists. Oh my God, but this still to do. But does it really make sense in that particular context? So how much impact will it have, and how much versus how much effort, right? Maybe if it is something not trivial for you, and you will pretty much stay in the same way. So you're already good. You already have a good vital, for example. So it's important that we understand how. That is why I mentioned how to you connect your efforts within the product and have
Exactly.
this view about it from a strategic perspective rather than just following a checklist. This is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Good chat on this. And now, Jason, so you wanted to share some good stuff as well. So let's talk about that now.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I have a presentation that is focusing really on the SERP features. Aleyda covered all of the great stuff that traditionally I think we're looking at as SEO. She pushed it a long way into Discover and SERP features, and talked about brand, which I was particularly intrigued by. John Mueller was saying we want to be looking for pull searches, and what he means by pull searches is brand searches. So Google are now saying openly, as brands, you should be looking to dominate your market as a brand. So they're saying, let's do some traditional marketing, which is really good news, I think, for brands, because it means that it brings it back more into our control, makes it more human. And what I deal with, brand search, becomes important. So I'm terribly, terribly pleased with John Mueller for saying that. So we're looking at making the most of SERP features in 2020 and 21. In fact, I had a quick look at the, excuse me, never ever leave your phone on. How ranking works in Darwinism. I wish that had rung when Aleyda was talking. I had an explanation from Gary Ilias last year, a year and a half ago, describing how the ranking algorithm actually functions. And Frederic Deboo from Bing confirmed it. I called it Darwinism in search. You can read the article on Search Engine Journal. I'll give you a really quick, brief overview. Basically, the blue links are the basic foundation of the results page. The blue links sit there. They bid, and this is what Gary Ilias calls them, and Frederic Deboo from Bing. They bid. They send in a bid, which is the bid of value to the user. It's not a monetary bid, it's a value to the user bid. And that's how the blue link algorithm then ranks its results. Then you have the other verticals, such as Twitter boxes, news, what am I talking about? Images, videos, all of those come along. They have an algorithm which is parallel that also puts in a bid. And if they can put in a higher bid, a higher value to the user, if they can prove to the algorithm, the major algorithm, that they have a better value, bigger value to the user in the context that user finds themselves in, they get a place on the SERP. And that is how these rich elements, these SERP features, get a place on the SERP or don't. Obviously, that was an incredibly quick explanation, probably doesn't make that much sense. Read the article, it makes lots of sense. But that brings us on to the rich elements and the SERP features. Now, Frederic Deboo pointed out to me, I thought the SERP features are going to be taking over and blue links are going to disappear. And he said, no, not at all. They're going to remain more or less stable. And that is true. They remain stable. The number of blue links on a page remains stable at an average of about 8 and a little bit. On the left rail, we have almost 1.5 rich elements on average. And that hasn't changed much since last May. So what seems to be happening is that they're swapping them in and out. What I see with brand SERPs in particular is image boxes will disappear and be replaced by video boxes when there are video boxes that actually provide value to the user that is more than the image boxes themselves. But what I found very interesting is on the right rail, we're seeing an explosion. The right rail is that right-hand side with the knowledge panel, the Google My Business, the related entities boxes. Absolutely explosion of content in that right rail. And that's a really good place to start thinking about branding, because it's all about branding. The entity boxes, the knowledge panel, and the Google My Business is all about your brand. So this is really, really important for 2021, along with, of course, the left rail with those rich sightings. People also ask video boxes, image boxes. They're an opportunity for visibility. And I would split them into 3 practical types, both the left and the right rail, these rich elements, what I call rich elements, SERP features, the near me ones, the entity ones, and the content ones. And if you split it down that way, it becomes really easy to deal with and focus on what it is you're trying to do. We'll start with the near me one. It's basically Google's humans curated business listings. It's Google My Business and the iterations of Google My Business across the maps on the left-hand side, or the Google My Business on the right-hand side. The people also search for, which is related businesses, and the discover more places, which appears on the left-hand side. So obviously in 2021, first thing to do, Google My Business, make it accurate and up to date. Go in there and correct everything you possibly can about your business. Now, I've put local, national, and international with different size fonts because I want to point out that for a local business, this is fundamentally important. It's the number one top thing you should be doing. But for national businesses, it's also important. People will also be seeing the Google My Business, but also the Google My Business is information that you're feeding to Google directly. And if that information is not accurate and up to date, you're feeding Google the wrong information. Google won't be able to understand who you are and what you can offer its audience. And even on an international level, it's still feeding information to Google about who you are, what you do, and who your audience is, which are my 3 favorite things in the entire world. Google needs to understand who you are, what you do, and who your audience is, if it's even to start thinking about offering you as a solution for its users or an answer to their questions. Next, entity elements. It's Google's machine curated encyclopedia. It's a nice way of saying it. It's basically Google is trying to understand the world in a similar manner to human beings, and it has an encyclopedia which is called the Knowledge Graph. And the Knowledge Graph is driving an awful lot of these rich elements, these SERP features, knowledge panels, which we see all the time on the right-hand side, the See Results About, which are just underneath, which is related entities, related things, related topics that you might be interested in. In my example, if you search for my name, Jason Barnard, as I said earlier, you've got Rand Fishkin, Joost de Valk. Don't yet have Aleyda, but I will. And that would mean that Google associates me with them. And as a brand, that's important to see who Google associates my brand with, who it's potentially sending its users towards. Then see results about knowledge cards, related searches, refined by, and events. These are driven by the knowledge panel and the knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph is the fundamental basis. I mean, Aleyda mentioned Andrea Volpini from WordLift earlier on. He's a big expert on this stuff. The knowledge graph, Google's understanding of the world, is the single most important thing in the next 10 years for any digital marketing strategy, because it's not just Google, it's Facebook, it's Apple, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, and all the social media platforms, all using knowledge graphs to understand who we are, what we do, and how we can offer something to their audience. And I think if you bear in mind that every time we talk about one of these machines, including Google, it's their audience we're talking about. It's their users. Our audience is a subset of their users. And if we remember that, we remember that we're looking to serve somebody else's user set. To do in 2021, schema.org markup, it needs to be simple, accurate, and corroborated. And I think that's really important. Don't get overexcited with schema markup. I got overexcited with schema markup, added much too much of it. And of course, it just created more confusion than it actually resolved. So keep it simple. There are some tools there that I've put on the right-hand side. WordLift, Andrea Volpini, absolutely brilliant. Schema app, Canadian company who do a schema markup SaaS platform. Yoast integrated in WordPress, brilliant, done by Jono Alderson, who you mentioned earlier on. And at Calicube, we do a very simple version, which is aimed just at companies and people. But you want to mark up in this order of priority: your company, then your product, then the people, and then carry on with the rest. Aleyda was mentioning the rich elements you can get in the SERP. I think they're great, and I think they're really important, and they can give you an excuse to do the schema markup to your boss. But the fundamental basis of schema markup is to speak Google's native language. Schema markup is your content recreated in Google's native language that it can digest like that. So you're confirming what Google has probably already understood is in your page using schema markup, and it makes it much more confident that it has understood what is in your page. And I put corroborated in bold because I think it's really important. A lot of people think I just put schema markup on my page and that's all I need to do. Google needs to understand, but it needs to be convinced that it has correctly understood. And that's corroboration. You need to get that information out onto third-party sites. Aleyda was talking about mentions and getting that EAT, the expertise, authority, and trust, the support of authoritative resources about you and your brand, but also the information, the facts about your brand. Next, branded content strategy elements. This is kind of more traditional SEO, and it's a really good motivation to create a decent content strategy. Just writing blog posts no longer hacks it. You want to be aiming for the image boxes, the video answers, the Twitter, the news, the podcast boxes, explore panels, features, notes, people also asking jobs. Incredibly important. And once you start looking at this and you start aiming for these rich elements, SERP features, you're going to naturally build a great content strategy. And Google, as I mentioned, will only show the content to its users if it's valuable and relevant. So you need to create valuable and relevant content. And if you are, you will get put in front of Google's users. And if you aren't, you won't. So just creating content for content's sake won't hack it. And I've put the people also asking green there, because one place I would start if I had to prioritize would be to start here, the FAQ section, questions about and around your brand and your topic. Incredibly powerful. And that's a great way to start your what people would call keyword research, but it's actually research into what my users, what my audience is asking, what they're looking for. Start answering them about my brand. So you can start with your brand SERP there. You look at if they appear there, answer those questions first, and then spread out bit by bit to about my brand, about my products, about my topic. And you will see, at the bottom there, you can see a lovely, lovely click graph as it goes up and up and up and up and up. And all we did was build an FAQ section. And we started answering questions about the brand, moved on to questions about the topic and about our industry more generally. And it's been a phenomenal success. Google is thirsty for questions and answers on simple topics that it can actually present to its users. And then I would go with videos. Obviously, a lot of it's on YouTube, as Aleyda said. 85% of video box content comes from YouTube, but 15% doesn't. And one of my clients actually installed on their site their YouTube videos, and all of a sudden they were getting 1,000 visits a month from those videos that were already on YouTube, because their site outranks YouTube because it's more authoritative about them, which is logical. So the idea, I mean, obviously YouTube dominates, but it doesn't have to dominate. If you can get that content, put it on your site, you are still the authority about yourself. So you should be able to out-optimize YouTube and get that traffic to your site if it's about you or your core topics. Then social and podcasts. For me, podcasts is the next big thing. It's the next big thing that Google's going to push into its knowledge graph and are going to explode onto the scene. So if you're thinking about a podcast, if you're thinking as a brand doing a podcast, get started. Good place to start, because in 2022, so I've just gone beyond 2021, 2022, this is going to explode like videos are going to explode in 2021. I already did in 2020. And importantly, I've put on and off site. Don't just think about the content on your own site. Think about the content on the social platforms, on the Twitter platforms, on YouTube. You want to push your content out to where your users already are, and potentially then take that content, repurpose it, and package it for Google. And I love the idea of creating a content strategy that's on third-party platforms, that pays for itself on third-party platforms, that you repackage on your site for Google as a bonus. And that has to be the El Dorado of content strategy. So you can track your brand SERP on Kalicube. This is my last slide. I'm obsessed by the idea that if you start with your brand SERP, and you analyze your brand SERP, and you understand what Google is presenting to your audience through your brand SERP, it's a brilliant place to start, not only to impress people with your Google business card when they do search your brand name, when they're making those pull queries, as John Mueller said, but also analyze what's right and wrong about your content strategy, what's positive and negative about what Google thinks the world thinks about you. Because if Google's showing a negative result, it thinks that the world thinks something negative about you. Your brand SERP represents what Google thinks the world thinks about you. And you can track it, you can measure it, and you can improve it. And I'm building a platform to make it a really simple process. Please do sign up for the beta. That's kalicube.pro with a little bit of help from WordLift and Authoritas. That's it from me. I hope that made sense, because it was incredibly fast.
But that was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And I think together, you and Aleyda, you covered a lot of different things, a lot. I think this can keep like anyone busy for the whole 2021. So thanks for sharing such amazing content. All right, Aleyda, do you want to add anything on what Jason just shared?
No, I think it's amazing, and 100%. I couldn't agree more with all of his information. I think that there's, a huge value on leveraging structured data far beyond only the SERP features on one hand. Then on the other hand, I think it is still like we need to enhance much more the opportunities that sometimes we have when we create content thinking indeed on YouTube only, but then this content that we can totally repurpose and also publish on our own website and connect it much more with us. And then, for example, in my own with my own for example, Crawling Monday videos, what I tend to do is I have Crawling Mondays in its YouTube channel, and great, it is included in the carousel, etc. But I have double inclusion sometimes by embedding the same video with Wistia embeds that also add the video object structured data to the video, and where I have also the opportunity to add a transcript and gains also organic search results, not only then an inclusion within the carousel, but also as a organic page. So I think that there are so many win-wins, and how we think about this and align the different content that we tend to already produce and distribute, but how we can leverage to even improve our own website experience, search experience, and maximize the opportunity within SERPs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like Aleyda, you mentioned, like, interview somebody and you have a video, and then you can just repurpose it and then have a landing page with text on it. And then you can also think about, just take the video off and publish it as a podcast. So one content can be published in many different ways. And Jason mentioned about podcasts, which is actually trending. Like, a lot of people are doing podcasts these days, including Jason. And yeah, and then even video. So even Aleyda, you mentioned in your YouTube SEO presentation that how videos are going up, and it is working great for you as well. So definitely, like, some great tips there. Thanks for sharing that.
I think that whole kind of repurposing thing from that perspective, I mean, as Aleyda said, doing transcripts of a video is pretty easy. Making a video from a blog article is significantly more complicated. So if you start with a video, you can then make the sound and the audio file, then you can make the transcript. And it's important to remember that Google still digests text, written text, much more easily than it will digest anything else. So doing that transcript is well worth the effort.
I actually do the two things. I do the transcript to create the blog post, for example, of the video. And then I also use Anchor to generate the sound file of the video, and then publish it as a podcast too. Of course, like if it is a how-to video, it will be much more difficult. But if it is an interview, it can work pretty well also as a podcast. So I love this one effort, multiple formats, and make the most out of the opportunity to distribute it and get visibility with it.
Brilliant. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Well, there's another aspect, which is, I mean, I'm obsessed by the idea that Google understands. When I talk, there's an article on Search Engine Journal. If you look at it from Google's point of view, Google needs three things, and it only needs three things. It needs to understand who you are and what you do and who your audience is. It needs to believe that you're credible, a credible solution for its audience. And it needs to believe that you can deliver. I call that understanding credibility and deliverability. And that idea of deliverability is that you have the content that they need, or you can provide the products that they need. And everything you do within your SEO strategy towards Google needs to serve one or more of those pillars: understanding, credibility, and deliverability. I'm personally obsessed with the understanding, and podcasts and videos and events are great ways that Google can get to grips with who you are, what your topic is. Because the more videos, I mean, Aleyda's a brilliant example. All of these videos and all of these transcripts and all of these podcasts around a topic make her an expert and an authority and trustworthy within that niche.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Now we are running out of time, so I'll just take like one last question. We have a few nice questions, but I'll try to answer them in YouTube Live. And one question which I'm really, I really want to ask you two is about page speed. So Aleyda mentioned about core web vitals, and then we have a question like, in the upcoming May algorithm update, will slow load times be a death sentence website? What's your take on that?
Well, do you want to answer, Aleyda?
Can you please repeat the question? I didn't understand the question.
Well, I think what they're asking is, within Core Web Vitals, is site speed incredibly important? And in fact, Core Web Vitals isn't about the speed of the web page as such. It's about the perceived user experience. It's the perceived user experience that they've actually measured for years. I remember 10 years ago, I started playing with one of the Google tools, which was they would show you two screens and show you two sites loading. You had to click on which one you thought looked fastest. And they used that human data to decide what they would then measure for the core web vitals. That's what I suspect they did. And it's all about that first contentful paint, which is the first thing that I see as a human being that makes me feel that the page is loaded. It isn't that the page is loaded, it's that I perceive it to have loaded. And then you've got the content shift, which is if something moves around on the page, it really annoys me as a user. And the third one is the delay between the moment when I click on a button or I try and interact with a page, and there's a half a second delay that's incredibly frustrating. Those are the three things, and none of them are about pure speed.
Yeah, this is important, right? Because many people go to the PageSpeed Insight tool and they only take into consideration sometimes, oh, but I get this metric, but I see that the one that the Google Search Console is showing me is a little bit different, right? Because we need to take into consideration that the sources of this data is different. One thing is that you measure yourself in your own environment, that you may have a great speed and this type of devices, and then what the Crux data does is to take the data into consideration of real users, and this is the data that is actually accessed. Then on the other hand, how these different metrics play together. We know that largest contentful paint, it needs to be lower than 2.5 seconds to be perceived as good. The FID, the first input delay, needs to be less than 100 milliseconds. CLS should be to be considered good should be less than 0.1. So how, like, which is more important and what you should prioritize? At the end of the day, I think that, well, it should be first about the users, but then if what you really want is to change the trend of the metrics for your most important pages, I will start with those templates that are used for the most critical pages of the website through the user journey, the ones more attracting more traffic too. You can take a look at how Google assess those in the Google Search Console. They give you in the Search Console help, where they explain how the Core Web Vitals report work. They tell you, look, these are the status definitions for each one of them, and this is the combination, right? For example, they say a URL on mobile with poor FID but needs improvement with LCP is labeled as poor on mobile, or a URL on mobile with needs improvement in LCP but good FID is labeled as need improvement, right? So they give you like the different combination, but pretty much you can see the weight of each based on the perceived importance, right? But I think that they are in general well balanced.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Nitin, just to because this plays off what I was saying earlier on. I think what's really important is to understand what the motivation of Google is to give us all this information, and it's being empathetic to Google. Google is trying to make the experience of its users better through our sites. And that's the kind of the empathy for Google, understanding credibility and deliverability. This is the deliverability aspect. It doesn't want to send people through to sites, its users through to sites that don't perform or aren't perceived by the human being to be performing in an adequate manner. And their motivation is they want to improve your web performance for their users who happen to be your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great discussion. And with that, we are 7 minutes over time. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to cut it here. But yeah, I think it was completely, worth having 7 more minutes, but because it was a lot of information, a lot of good tips from both of you. Thank you so much once again for sharing that. And thank you so much once again for joining us. And yeah, we're good with that. So then I wish everyone a very happy new year and a strong year ahead with all these tips that they've shared. And yeah, if you have any questions which are not answered here, feel free to catch any one of us on Twitter. I think we are all really active on Twitter, right? Yeah, yep. Unless you want to share any other preferred communication channel.
No, Twitter's fine for me. And thank you, Nitin, for having me. Thank you, Aleyda, for that amazing presentation. And the audience, thank you for listening. I mean, brilliant
Thank
stuff.
you for the opportunity. I had such a great time, and it was so fun to be able to share it with you. I will be uploading the deck too, so you can take a look at it, and an article that I had written about this topic too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aleyda, for that. And thanks for joining us.